The Aware Project's aim is to balance the public conversation about psychedelics, spread accurate information, and give a new face to psychedelia. We feel that this change will occur through connection and relationship, one individual at a time. We are calling on everyone whose lives have been improved through the mindful use of psychedelics to educate themselves and become ambassadors for the psychedelic experience. Show those around you that people who use psychedelics mindfully cross all social, racial, economic, and political boundaries.
We're going to now invite up Sita to introduce our speakers. So Sita has been a longtime friend, and she produced a conference a couple years ago here in LA. It was a Herculean effort bringing together so many speakers and artists and amazing people around plant medicine, and continues to be an amazing promoter of education and connecting people to speakers. So just excited that we got to, you inspired us to do this event and collaborated with us. So here's Sita.
Hi everybody that I can't see. So welcome, and thank you very much, Ashley, for allowing me to participate and contribute for this particular event. And tonight's event, From Mystery to Integration, is with Joe Tafur and Rachel Harris. I'm going to read their bios. So Rachel Harris is the author of Listening to Ayahuasca, New Hope for Depression, Addiction, PTSD, and Anxiety. And this book, you may have noticed, is available for sale at the front or the back of the room. She was in the 1968 Esalen Residential Program and had a private psychotherapy practice for 35 years. Rachel received a National Institutes of Health New Investigators Award and has published more than 40 scientific studies in peer-reviewed journals. Quite impressive. She lives on an island off the coast of Maine and winters in the San Francisco Bay Area. And Dr. Joe Tafur is a Colombian-American family physician, originally from Phoenix, Arizona. After completing his family medicine training at UCLA, Dr. Tafur spent 2 years in academic research at the UCSD Department of Psychiatry in a lab focused on mind-body medicine. After his research fellowship over a period of 6 years, he lived and worked in the Peruvian Amazon at the traditional healing center Nihuerao Centro Espiritual. There he worked closely with Master Shipibo shaman Ricardo Amaringo and trained in ayahuasca shamanism. In his new book, The Fellowship of the River, also at the back of the room, a medical doctor's exploration into traditional Amazonian plant medicine, through a series of stories, Dr. Tafur shares his unique experience and integrative medical theories. And he will also tonight talk to us, I hope, a little bit about a new project, Modern Spirit, an Epigenetics project. And we're also really fortunate to have Tony Moss with us. And for those who don't know Tony, he's a visual and recording artist, event producer, and founder of I Am Life, a nonprofit event production company focused on interconnectivity. His work is a synthesis of passions in art, spirituality, and science, with emphasis on the evolution of human consciousness and potential. From 20 years experience working with ayahuasca, he is a public advocate for right relationship use of all plant medicines. And so, for each of these people, I'd like to just say something personal, and first to thank you, actually, a public thank you to Tony Moss, who really was with me by my side every step of the way, providing all kinds of support for the conference, Visionary Convergence, and has just really been a beacon in the community for me personally. Thank you, Tony. And a highlight of last year was being asked to be a panelist on ayahuasca at the Pioneers Conference, and that's like Pioneers with a B. Check it out, pioneers.org. And Rachel Harris was on the panel with me, and so that was a highlight. But really the best part of going to Pioneers was meeting Rachel, who now is a dear friend. And so yeah. And then Joe, just like being friends with Joe is a highlight of my life. So I welcome Tony to do a short invocation, after which we'll hear from Rachel and Joe. Thank you.
Sitting in a chair, as you can see. I started off as a professional dancer. I did musical theater for probably 12 years of my life. And somewhere in that process, started to kind of have a spiritual awakening. And the psychedelic and theogenic experience of that came way later. My very first ayahuasca ceremony was actually by accident. A friend invited me, and just because I trusted him, I said I would go, but I had no idea what ayahuasca was. I'll date myself, and this was pre-internet for me. So there was no place to go look at it. But he said to me, oh, it's like that movie In the Forest. And I was like, oh, I just saw that film, I love it. We're gonna be like in the forest, I'm gonna be the spirit animal. So I went and did not have that experience. Hated every minute of it. But as the weeks went on, I started noticing there was a shift. So I went back again, and that was now 23 years ago. We traveled far to find this place where weary souls find a warm embrace. We traveled far to find this place where weary souls find a warm embrace. And all our love, all our love, it comes from this place. All our love, it comes from this place. We travel far from outer space to bring you love and a warm embrace. We travel far from outer space to bring you love and a warm embrace. And all our love, it comes from this place. All our love, it comes from this place. We travel far from inner space to calm the war with a warm embrace. We travel far from inner space to calm the war with a warm embrace. And unto you we sing and pray to run this place. Unto you we sing and pray to run this place. May all the bombs turn into birds and fly away. May all the bombs turn into birds and fly away. And nothing else, and nothing else. So yeah, I left the theater career thinking that I was giving up music because I had to, go through this journey. And thank goodness for Ayahuasca that actually brought music back into my life in the most profound way possible. And one of the things I love, before we bring on Joe, who I'm just completely excited, and Rachel excited to meet, is a lot of people are calling this neo-shamanic. These basically contemporary versions that really honor and incorporate indigenous tradition, use of plant medicines, which is what I'm all about and I'm really thankful for. Yeah, and that song's an example. When I started leading ceremony, I was only singing like everybody else, Icaros, because that's what was appropriate. And little by little, we kind of had some freedom, and we worked with the Shipibo, and lo and behold, they said, oh, we would be singing in English if we could. You should do your own thing. And it kind of gave us permission. So what we just shared is the kind of music, actually, that we do in ceremony. So thank you. Joe!
All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Tony. That was fantastic. And Shereen, thank you both. Thank you, Aware Project. Thank you, Sita, for making it happen. Thank you, Rachel. I'm here facing off with my beloved arch nemesis. A rematch. A lot of people gave it to Rachel last time.
I've been in training.
She's been doing some secret training. I'm very humbled to be at her side, and I just ask that you don't humiliate me anymore, like last time. But anyways, we're here, and we have a little system of time, and so I'm going to speak for a little bit, and then Rachel's going to speak for a little bit, and we're going to interview each other, which we did at this last event. And then we'll take a few questions, and then it's kind of like a schmooze and listen to music and hang out and talk to you guys and maybe sell some books. I'm not so worried about selling books. Rachel is kind of, push. No, she doesn't care. I'm trying to sell some books, and so they are available, and we can sign them for you and all that kind of stuff. Anyways, so what I want to talk about, so we're mystery to integration, so we both kind of approach it from our backgrounds, and as I mentioned, my background, I'm a medical doctor, and went down to the Amazon and got really involved and very interested and pursued ayahuasca shamanism and the Shipibo tradition, and kind of a traditional opportunity of sorts, and neo-shamanic, and at the same time very much there in the forest and living with the family and the whole thing. And so on my side of the integration piece she's going to talk more about what I think a lot of people think about an integration, and I'm going to talk about integration a little bit around, just from a medical doctor's perspective, about science and biology, and how do we integrate it into our Western thinking system. A lot of people struggle with that. They go and they have their experience and they don't know how to make sense of something like that. So first I want to say, I'm getting involved in Arizona with some friends of mine, some Navajo community members, one of the tribes there, one of the native tribes in Arizona. And my friend Daryl, he's a medicine man, and he's a Peyote road man, but he also is a medicine man of his Navajo tradition, which is not, they do a lot of ceremony with no plants or no anything, and just stay up all night and pray and sing and do a lot of things, and it's very powerful. So it's just ritual and ceremony and song, beyond just with the assistance of the plants, etc., and just the power of ceremony. And Daryl says all the time, and it's kind of related to something that I talk about, or I'm trying to promote, at least through the book, and it's just other people's ideas of this. I in the book I kind of talk about how mind body is this concept that the Western researchers and doctors have become comfortable with. It's pretty established, mind body. It's okay to talk about mind body at a doctor conference, things like that. And then, so that's a pair that's been described. And then there's emotion, the emotional body. The emotion is being paired by a lot of cultures to energy, to the energies. That the emotional body or the emotions are paired to energy. And that energy, that portal into energy is like kind of the portal into maybe spirit, to, mysterious experiences that we have that exist perhaps beyond the comprehension of our mind, but we still feel them. And so Daryl, he was like, he's hearing that he's having his son read the book to him sometimes, And he's like, oh, and his son, Daryl tells me, he's like, oh, my son says, Dad, this guy sounds like you. He's saying a lot of the same things you're saying. So I talked to Daryl about it. We go to, they have these sweat lodges, and I go on, and Daryl says, he's like, Joe, he's like, first is the spirit. The spirit is first. And then the feeling, inspired by the spirit. He says, and then the mind reflects on the feeling, you know, and then the action that comes from it. So he says that's the way it works. That's what he's telling me. And so for me that was a big deal, because what I kind of was trying to map out with the book is this mind-body connection, and trying to say I was at a lab where they researched this, and now there's these fields that I'm always talking about and promoting, psychoneuroimmunology and psychoneuroendocrine immunology, which is basically the science of how the mind is connected to the body. You know, the way your psychology, it affects the way your brain functions, affects the way the nerves function that come out of the brain, and the way they communicate. That's already 10 minutes? Oh, that's 5, okay, we get the system. She was throwing me the other signal. And so, and then the way that communicates to the immune system and the endocrine system and the hormones. And so I've been talking about that, how to me that system, psychoneuroendocrine immunology, that system that's being described by all this mind-body research, I think that's the emotional body. I think that's the emotional body that a lot of other cultures have been talking about. And the reason I say that is because you can show with science how emotional trauma affects the function of that emotional body. You can show how war trauma creates PTSD in that emotional body, in that psychoneuroendocrine immunologic body. You can show how PTSD causes that. And you can show how deep emotional healing experiences, like what people have in the MDMA trial, the MDMA-assisted psychotherapy trial is really what it is, that they have a healing, and then their psychoneuroendocrine immunologic network, their physical body, their anatomy, their physiology, it changes. It changes function. And so that's emotional biology. You know, that's what I'm talking about. It's emotional biology, and it's emotional biology that responds to emotional healing and the mysterious things that are sometimes connected to emotional healing, that are very close to spiritual tradition and practice. Things like the forgiveness process that people go through, the gratitude that they access, you know, the self-love that they encounter, and the compassion, for example, that they now are open to. These heartfelt, these heart-open, these emotional body into the energy field experiences that people have, and that allows this physiology to change inside them, in their bodies. And so that's, to me, that's really important. So I'm always, and this guy, I presented this stuff, the book and the ideas at Yale last week. Presented at Yale, yeah, it's true, Yale. Keep going, they want her, and she was busy. And Joe, if you come, will you get Rachel? Can you get Rachel? Like, oh, ow! Again, with the Rachel. And so I went, and because I have friends there. So this psilocybin research that you're describing, Yale is one of the places. Ben Kelmendi and Jordan Sloshower are two guys that are like fighting the power at Yale to push through this psilocybin research. And it's not just psilocybin, the drug, it's like MDMA. It's not MDMA, it's MDMA-assisted psychotherapy. Okay? So it's not just ayahuasca, it's ayahuasca ceremony with tradition, experience behind it. Why? Why? To be effective. That's why. You know? That's why. You don't know, maybe you don't know like what's possible with that thing, you know? You say, oh, I know a little bit about therapy, or I did MDMA. But it's like, are you healing treatment-resistant people at numbers that like no other treatment modality that's out there is doing for these people? It's like, no, you're not. You know, you can get. It's okay. It's okay to admit that there is like a skill set, that there's a direction you can go. There's a knowledge you can gain. There's a training you can submit yourself. There's something you can learn to take something a lot further, perhaps, than you imagined. You know, and that's the power of this integrated techniques like MDMA-assisted psychotherapy, which involves this entire context. So they're doing that, and so they're going to try to do psilocybin within some kind of therapeutic context. Why? Because they want it to be more effective. You know, a lot of people are doing mushrooms, a lot of people are doing mushrooms. not necessarily everybody is having these amazing, some people are having novel healing experiences on their own or with, you know, kind of like an amateur approach. But maybe, you know, there's more. Maybe there's more possible. There's a way to get more out of that. And the reason that's important, because if you're a doctor or you're in healing work, is because a lot of people need help, you know, and so they want a little more than that. And it's really nice to try to give them that. And so Yale, one of the guys, Ben Kelmendi, is an epigenetics researcher. And so one of the things that I propose in the book, which is largely inspired from ayahuasca experiences in my time there, was that, you know, what part of the biochemistry, if you have this biochemistry in your body and all these molecules, what part of it is the part that like actually responds to this energy? You know, you can go down, I was reading this meditation research, and they have the meditation research and they follow it down. They're like, okay, well, these proteins, they got this more proteins, or they have this hormone change, and you follow it back and you follow, well, where is it being made? Where is it being made more? Oh, the genes are making more, they're producing more of this hormone or this receptor. Okay, but where? When you trace that back, where? Where does it happen? Oh, well, it's because they're in this relaxed mind state and their heart rate and all that stuff. But yeah, but they have this intention going on inside themselves, you know, with their focus and their awareness and their attention. And that's also happening. It's something shifting inside their physiology because they keep measuring all this physiologic change from meditation. And so, because of a lot of different reasons, I looked at this, I feel like it's not just me, and reading a lot of people's papers, is like the epigenetics was a part, it's like a dead end of that pathway. They're just right, what sits right on top of the genes, not what is the DNA, what sits right on top of the DNA, what reads the DNA and kind of deals with the world and shares, you know, the like feedback of what's out there. You know, like they talk about the contractor that reads the blueprint in response to the environment. That part right there is where it kind of dead ends. You can show that that shifts with meditation, and that'll shift with psychotherapy, and that'll shift with emotional trauma. You know, you yell at a child long enough, you can show in a lot of cases of epigenetic changes from the energetic exchange, it would seem. So and I think that's an area, and so now we have this Modern Spirit Epigenetics project, which we're trying to get funding for. I know some of you are very rich. You know, I also plan to one day be very rich, so I'm with you. We can talk about it. But while we're talking about it, think about investing in this. And so this is the Modern Spirit Epigenetics project. So we are going to tag on. We've been talking to MAPS about the MDMA assisted psychotherapy. We wanted to do with ayahuasca. We still might do with ayahuasca in Peru, in traditional healing areas. But while we do that, we want to do it with the MDMA study. And do saliva swabs and check people's epigenetics to look for these physiologic shifts associated with these big outcomes that they're getting in the study, to try to start to prove some emotional biology and trauma healing at that level, and open the door through that to spiritual work in modern healthcare. And that's kind of the goal of Modern Spirit. And I have 5 minutes. So I just want to barely touch on like an example of something like this, and it's because this lady wrote me just a couple days ago who came for 10 days or something to Dewey Rao, and I happened to be there. We were running some groups, and she had some major healing there, and part of her major healing was around bulimia, which is a real tough problem for Western allopathic psychological approaches. It's very frustrating to the system. They're not getting a lot of progress. You know, I don't know if Adele is here, but there's people looking into this, and we've seen a lot of shifts around eating disorders down there in Peru, well, at least in a few cases, anecdotes. And there's always trauma, you know, it's always trauma and just getting at it the right way, you know, and really you need this spiritual context sometimes to get at this deep, deep trauma. And this is just something that happened. This is just my small part in trying to talk about the shamanic side of things. Is because she wrote me, she's like, I don't want to say I'm cured, but it's been 6 months, you know, I'm not doing this anymore. And she has a lot of trauma in her life. I had never met her before. I showed up that day, didn't get a chance to talk to her. Ceremony is getting a little intense. She's suffering a lot, you know, she's crying, you can hear her suffering back there. So then eventually Ricardo, like, Joe, you know, go see what's happening, you know, go help. What are you doing? You're sitting there, you help her out, you know, you should be helping her. So I go and then see her. She can't talk that much, you know, she's in so much pain. And so I'm like, okay, you know, that's fine, you don't have to talk. So go through the process, this long training, what I'm talking about, and I try to write about in the book, the Shipibo style, which I have a lot of respect for the Shipibo and Ricardo and the Amazon and the Amazonians and the jungle and the plants. And so singing to her, and so then we train to try to see in our visions, with ayahuasca, to see inside what's going on. And so I see this big thing on her stomach, this big thing. I don't know her, I've never met her before. See this big thing on her stomach, it's like a watermelon-sized thing. She's just like, oh, well, okay. And then I see this face clutching to the side of it, this face, like this woman, and it looks just like her. It looks just like her, and I'm like, is that her? It's gotta be her relative. Is that her aunt? I don't know, I feel like it's her aunt. And then, then trying to see, it's a spirit, somebody died. I don't know what it is, somebody died. The ayahuasca is kind of talking to me. And it's like, we gotta help her, release this pain, this grieving, this thing, this hurt, and she's wrapped it all up in her stomach. And working on her, I'm working on her with a song to help release that energy as much as possible and send that to the light, help her go through that release and then go back and talk to the shamans. Hey, this is, we got to work on this. She's got some spirit, blah, 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 the shop talk of the ceremony. And so then the next day I talked to her, what happened? And she felt better during the process. And she said, yeah, her mom had died when she's 9. And I was like, does your mom look like you? Everybody says my mom looks just like me. And it was this whole thing, and it's about working that energy to help somebody have this emotional release that then leads to this shift, and she hasn't had any, believe me, for 6 months. That was there were a lot of people singing to her, there are a lot of people more advanced than me, and then there's her and everything she gave to the process, and the other plan she took, but that's kind of an example. Ha! Watch this, and she's going to destroy you. I'll keep it mystical for me.
I have to stand up. I'm the Western psychologist here, so I just want to say. Oh, you're right. Sorry. Do you want to use the stand? No. So I'm the Western psychologist here, so I just want to say about eating disorders. 1 out of 10 people with that diagnosis will die from the eating disorder. It's really serious, difficult to work with, and 6 months is an incredible follow-up. I hope you can continue to follow up with her. It's an amazing story, and it's part of the reason we use the word mystery, from mystery to integration. There's a lot of mystery here. There's more mystery than integration, if you don't mind. So it's a wonderful story, Jeff. I've decided to be nice to you tonight, just to catch you off guard. I don't know how long it'll last. It's a trick, I'm sure. But I also want to acknowledge the Navajo inspiration. And so here's a statement about community, because we're here as a community, and there's a interesting growing underground community that's connected in very amazing and heart-opening ways. So here's this is a quote from the study of a Navajo healing ceremony, a vision quest. For 4 days after the conclusion of the ceremony, the patient is considered by family and friends as if he or she is a holy person, and given an opportunity to focus, evaluate, interpret, and experience a new self. So that's the community support to experience a new self. And that's a psychological statement and a spiritual statement. And I have a great question for you when we get to interview each other. I just want to say I can't wait for that, for the spiritual side. And so because I'm a psychologist, when I felt called to do research, I knew my personal limitations, and I'm totally awed by Joe's experiences and Sita's experiences also. So I knew I had to limit my research to North America. So I did a study that gathered quantitative and qualitative data. And I'm just going to touch on one of the core findings. And that was, this was, you know, when you develop a research study, you interview experts to help develop the questionnaire. So I spoke to a number of shamans, and this one very modest female shaman just sort of sweetly, mildly, quietly said, ask them about their ongoing relationship with the spirit of ayahuasca. And I'm like, sure, okay, whatever. You know, I hardly know what I'm doing, but I know enough to get help. So I included that question in the questionnaire, and that for me was a critical finding, and it was mind-blowing. And I mean, I'm implying, and I want to be explicit because we're a community here, I really felt I had a real experience of being told to do the research. So I'm sorry I said inner. It was really an outer voice. And so I rose to the occasion. There was no more guidance about what research to do. And that's why I went to interview shaman to develop the questionnaire. When we looked at the data, 3/4 of the people said they had a personal relationship with the spirit of ayahuasca. And I was shocked. This is not a Western, it's not usually a Western experience to report a relationship with a plant. Maybe in this room, I'm sure it's 3/4 of the people here, but in general, it's not true. And I was shocked, even though I also had an ongoing relationship. I was just shocked that almost everybody did. And then, well, how does the relationship unfold? How do you communicate? People talked about receiving guidance, support, and love, receiving messages intuitively or psychically through thoughts, feelings, visions, meditation, or prayer. People reported they could ask specific questions and receive answers and guidance in making life decisions. So this is really an amazing report. It's all of a sudden a relationship with a plant spirit, totally outside the Western normal frame of reference. So I, you know, with my own ontological anxiety and crisis, I went to my religion friends. So I interviewed Bob Foreman. He's an expert on mysticism. And I asked him, so who's this voice? I've heard this voice. Who's this voice? I know I'm not crazy. Who's the voice? And his response was, I don't know. I was like, okay. So then I thought, well, I'm going to go higher up. So I interviewed, I interviewed Houston Smith. He's a famous professor, author of Religions of Man, I think now. I forget what he called it, Religions of Humanity or something in the follow-up version. And he gave me the exact same answer. We don't know. We don't know who that voice is. So there's enormous mystery. But what we do know is that this is one of the more psychedelic experiences where people have this personal ongoing relationship. And from my point of view as a psychologist, it's an incredibly therapeutic source. So, and it's the relationship that makes it therapeutic also. So people receive really therapeutic advice from the voice during the ceremony, after the ceremony, and having that sense of an ongoing relationship with a loving, kind, healing spirit that's always available. That's healing in itself. And as far as I know, this is a pretty unique to this one particular medicine. There are certainly other relationships to other plant spirits and plant teachers, but this one is unusually, remarkably, mysteriously therapeutic. And there's some research in the psychology of religion that talks about the relationship with God as an attachment relationship. That is actually, an attachment relationship is usually with our primary caretaker, usually our mothers. And there's something about having this kind of safe, consistent, healing relationship that's an attachment relationship that can heal childhood breaches in attachment. So it can kind of fill in the spaces. People can kind of rewire themselves, literally and neurologically, to have a different sense of the world and themselves in the world, their sense of feeling safe in the universe. Sita and I were just talking about that. Can I just quote you? Sita said, what was it you said? You expect everyone to be nice. And I said, really? You know, that's a statement about your experience in the world. And that's grows out of an attachment relationship. And so I'm really proposing that the ongoing relationship with the spirit of ayahuasca is a healing attachment relationship. Now it's also so specifically therapeutic. I can tell you about someone I've been meeting with. He's a Jungian analyst, and he's relatively new to this whole scene, and he's working with a shaman in Peru. And so a Jungian analyst, he himself has had tons of therapy and his own analysis and everything. And he reported, so that's all the psychological level. Even though Jungian has a depth psychology to it and a spiritual aspect to it, still, he reported that was that 5 minutes left? In ceremony, I'm going to toss this one to you. In ceremony, he felt he was still dealing with his father's abuse of his mother. And even though he had complete understanding of it, had worked with it emotionally, all kinds of levels and ways, something happened and he couldn't exactly say why. It's always a mystery what happens in ceremony. So that his report was something lifted. So that part of his history lifted and left. So was removed. I mean, it's sort of almost describing a psychological kind of surgery. And of course, I've been following up with him. It's left. It's left. So I want to say something that that he and I have talked about, because this is sort of my current excitement. And when I first was working on the research and the book, I was looking for therapists who were working with people who were regularly in a process of going to ceremonies, so that there was a sort of an unfolding in that mystical, spiritual realm. And then what did they do in psychotherapy? And I had trouble finding therapists who were working with people. People felt like they were getting enough from the ceremonies, they didn't need psychotherapy. Having spent my life doing psychotherapy, you know, I sort of think, let's support the profession. You know, I just have a prejudice that it's always helpful. Anyway, so, but then, you know, with this guy, this Jungian analyst himself, talking about whatever was left of his issues with his father, just evaporating practically, floating, lifting. What do you do with that as a therapist? I mean, really, in all honesty, all you can do is screw it up. You know, if you start asking questions, you're just going to screw. That's a whole, complete experience in itself. And so for those of us who are doing therapy or talking about integration, we need to be able to differentiate when to work with something and when to keep out of it. That what happened was so magical and so mystical that all we're going to do is screw it up and somehow try to downgrade a mystical experience into a psychological one, and that's harmful. So I want us to really respect the mystery. And then there are real signs of when someone does need therapy and after ceremonies. And it's when, you know, I imagine many of us have read stories of people on a mission, you know, where they get an ego inflation and they think, you know, well, now I've been called to be a shaman, so I'm going to start leading ceremonies. No, I don't know how to do it, but I'll learn. You know, so there's an inflation that happens. Or if someone is, I have an example of a young woman who came to me to be interviewed, is this it, for the research, and she talked for 20 minutes about her relationship with the divine feminine. This was a mystical, spiritual experience. She was so thrilled. And she went on, and finally, I couldn't control myself as a therapist anymore. This was supposed to be a research interview, and I crossed a line. And what do therapists say? So I said, well, how's your relationship with your mother? And she burst into tears. So that's what's the phrase of spiritual bypass, where she's using the spiritual experience really as a defense to deal with what we all need to deal. I mean, good God, we all need to deal with our relationship with our mothers. So I say this as a mother, my poor daughter. I don't have any real rules for how do we differentiate a spiritual mystical experience that is almost by definition what William James called it was discontinuous transformation. It happens. It just happens. And we really don't want to mess with that. How to differentiate between that and inflation and spiritual bypass and some other issues that really do need follow-up and working through. How'd I do? That's the time? Good. Okay, Joe, I'm starting with questions. This is the fun part. We don't tell each other this part. So I think the last time I asked you, because I think the singing and the Shipibo tradition is incredible. And usually I ask about that, but not tonight. So I want to ask a harder, more personal question. I'm sorry, I hope this isn't too personal. Haha. Can you talk about your own experience, or I'll give you an out, or your experience working with people with the process of cleaning the heart center? And I just want to say, because the heart is the heart of this work. And Joe is all heart, believe it or not.
Well, don't fall for it. Don't fall for it. Well, I would say about the experience of cleaning the heart, and so yeah, I mean, it's back to this whole mystery psychology. One of the lines I said something about, it's like, is it real? Is it not real? And it's like, well, it's as real as heartache, you know? I haven't figured that one out, I guess, but I don't know, is it real? It's as real as joy, you know? I don't know if they figured it all out, the explanation or the right words to use to describe it, but then there's that joyful child right there in front of everybody's face. And so, in trying to clean the heart, which is a big focus of a lot of Shipibo shamanism, you know, it's like the techniques around some of the basics is you're trying to clean out somebody's physical body, their physical being, trying to clean out their mind, you know, their soul or their spirit, the energies, and then their heart. And there's a lot of different ways that looks. In my case, what does it look like? The most recent, or not that recent, but a while ago, was just trying to figure out I'm trying to think of a good one that I just saw in somebody also. In my case, it was like self-hate, you know, looking with Ricardo's like, look into your body, look inside, see, keep looking. It's uncomfortable. I don't want to look at that. I don't know. Look. I just see, it's like from Aliens or whatever, that thing that was on the guy's chest, you know? Just all up here, throat. And just like, what is that? You know, just hate. Just like self-hate. And so then it's like releasing that and trying to let that go. And so, how do you do that? You ask, in these cases, you ask Ayahuasca to help you, ask somebody to help you. In my case, I'm going to try to sing, you know, try to do what I can to let it go and heal. And then you're also, at some point, then Ricardo would encourage you to forgive yourself, you know, like forgiveness and asking for help. I don't know how to forgive myself. Okay, ask for help to forgive yourself. You know, I don't know how, please help me. And then ultimately, kind of like touching into what you're touching in as your people, Ricardo will say, well, and then eventually just like a little piece of toilet paper, you always have a roll of toilet paper by him for his little props, for his speeches. Pulls out a little piece of toilet paper, he's like, then just put it up there and just let the wind blow it away, you know? And just, you know, let it go. And so it's a combination of all those things, you know. Sometimes it's digging, you know, dig, dig, dig. Sometimes it's just, you know, when it's rocks and covered, you know, maybe bang on it. You know, sometimes it's just soft, 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 soft. Love and kindness, love and kindness, love and kindness, you know. And sometimes it's just like leaving space, you know. Sometimes it's tears, sometimes it's laughter. I don't know, it's all those kind of things, I think. Yeah. You got me, you got me. How could you? Well, I wanna touch on something just because it's been coming up, this whole idea of the pendulum swing of the psychedelic world. And just you know, you touch on it in your book, but I don't know the real story or what it was like to kind of be in that world that was like, oh, psychedelic psychotherapy, here it is, it exists. And then, you know, kind of getting taken away. And just then, okay, you have to find a new direction for your life, or, you know, something like that. The things that happen. And then ayahuasca comes into your life later in life, and that, I don't know, that space, like how it fell off, and did you ever think you were going to come back to it, and then ayahuasca coming back?
Joe was referring to how old I am.
This is what she does. I'm trying to. Oh my God.
You think he's being nice and asking a question. So, when I graduated from college in 1968,
recently,
when you weren't born yet, I think. You know, I don't have to pretend. Esalen and Big Sur was rife with psychedelics. I was 21. And so when I finally extricated myself from Esalen a couple of years later, through my connection with Stan Groff, I went down to see if I could get a job at the research center at the Maryland Psychiatric Institute, where they were doing research. So there were two things that were wrong. The research was just about ending because LSD was being made illegal, and all the research, you know, Nixon's war on drugs was stopping all the research. And I didn't have a graduate degree. So, you know, the head of the psychiatrist who was head of the program was very sweet. He met with me, and he basically, like a nice father, said, go to graduate school, which I eventually did. But that was the end of a dream for me, and Joe is right. That was a loss of hope for me. I couldn't even find a graduate school that would really work for me for almost a decade. They were still very traditional, and I'd just come out of a couple of years at Esalen, and I was in a totally different space. So I was really out of sync. And then I thought that was it for me, for that work. Because of that Esalen connection, I tended to work with people who were interested in their own development and their psychospiritual therapy. And so that was sort of a little boutique practice. So I had that background that worked, but I didn't think there was any chance for any research or what's now being called a psychedelic renaissance. And then the story is that my daughter was in graduate school, you know, grown, so to speak, and I was very free, and I was looking for a beach vacation in February. I was living in New Jersey. Who doesn't want to go to the beach in February in New Jersey? I thought it was perfectly sane. And so I went to this little retreat center in Costa Rica that I'd heard about, and I didn't even really look at the program. And let me tell you, even when I looked at the program, I didn't get it. I didn't know what they were talking about. But somebody called me a couple days before I left who was doing all the travel arrangements, and she said, do you want to be in the ceremony? And I brilliantly said, what ceremony? So, but of course the answer was yes. I mean, really, you know, my old roots came back to me. It was like, oh my God, sure, I'll do this, I'll do this. I had no idea what it was. And that was my first experience. It was really lovely and opening, and so that was in 2005, and that kind of brought me back into this world. And you know, you know, how did that happen? Was this just a synchronicity, or was I called? So this was just sort of too much of a coincidence, and so it opened up this whole world for me. One of the things Joe has asked me publicly, to embarrass me, is how long did you work on the book? And the answer is it's a decade of work. It's from the research, the doing of the research, the development of it, the doing, the collecting data, the analyzing it, the publishing, and then translating that into a book that has to cover a much wider territory. It's a whole decade of work in the book. So thank you for asking.
Thank you. Do you have another question, or are we opening it up? That's
Yeah,
enough.
let's open it up.
Okay.
Are we trying to open it up? Is that?
No, we can open it. Let's open it up. So we're going to open it up to the crowd.
We can't, just so you know, we can't see anything.
Right. There's a guy with his hand up
Yeah.
there.
Could you expand upon how we touch upon the wounds that we need to heal? And so how do we also not get enamored with being impressed with ourselves, with how smart we are for being here, and all the books that we read, and all the interesting conversations we have, and staying aloof in that, and that keeps us away from healing ourselves?
You want to touch on that?
Sure.
Take it easy on Rachel.
You know him?
No, I'm just kidding.
The ceremonies are so humbling, at least for me, that I'm pretty far from being enamored of myself in that regard. I mean, they're really humbling. My goal is to get to the bathroom on time. So that's, you know, that's my intention for the ceremony. So I'm sorry, but, you know.
Which suggests that maybe one time.
Very close. You just never know. I think one thing all the psychedelics do is they give us an opportunity to have some distance from our personality that we've constructed in order to survive in the world. So I'm sort of describing this personality that we spend decades constructing and creating in order to survive whatever our very young wounds were. So the personality is sort of a large defense mechanism almost to survive. And then, you know, that construction helps us make our way in the world, hopefully, that's a successful one. And then it becomes a prison. It gets rigid, and as we get older, it gets even more rigid and limiting and constricting, and our brain actually develops, I mean, this is sort of a metaphor, I think, but certainly we get neurological pathways that go deeper and are more likely to connect in certain ways. And all the psychedelics are they create new neurons and new connections among the neurons. So there's this incredible opening and new possibilities in the brain that allows us, with that objectivity, that distance from the personality we've constructed, to begin to really question, is this working for us? Is this how I want to be? So it opens up choice and freedom from what we've spent our lives developing, that we can now, and people talk about recalibrate, rewire, you know, reboot. There are all these kind of colloquial ways of describing. We get a chance to take a look at what we've constructed and see what we want to keep and what we don't want to keep, and how we came to build it that way. So there's a real process, and I have a quote somewhere of one of the old LSD researchers who talked about the LSD session is the beginning opportunity to restructure the personality. That's you know, therapists don't talk like that. You know, we talk about functioning and maybe improving. Restructure the personality, that's a huge goal. And I think the psychedelics open up that possibility.
How do we overcome the fear of when we want to restructure our personality and then we have to go back out into the world, family, friends, and loved ones who think we're nuts for trying to restructure the personality that they created in us?
You want to go for that?
I mean, now I'm trying to enter the fray. To me, it's like, you know, it's just, you're describing to me like this road from the mind to the heart, right? To me, that's kind of what you're talking about. And so then, you know, if I go back to my friend Daryl, the Navajo, what he says all the time, it's like, oh, they're so happy, you know, I don't know, I guess people, they're so happy with themselves, with the way they think, or all their ideas, or I don't know, the technology, or whatever. And then, you know, so then that's supposed to be like what it is, but then, you know, the reality of our lives is how we feel. Like, it's just, there's just no way out of that, you know? No matter how smug the person comes across, like, they give you a bad feeling, you walk away with a bad feeling. And so he's saying, Daryl says, you know, well, first is the spirit, and then the feeling, then the mind reflects on that. He says, you know what, it's only in this moment, through my heart and feeling, that I even have a chance to access joy. That's the only place that actually happens. That's a logical point. You know, that's a very well thought out point to any reasonable person. And he says, but then what happens is, this is where I can actually experience it. This is where I can actually be so enamored or whatever, be happy with myself and what is around me and what is. The only way I can do it is like, it's just right now. That's what it feels like, to laugh. I'm laughing, haha, it's like, oh, I'm just in the moment, you know? And he says, oh, but then these guys, he's like, look, they think they can figure it out. Oh, I've had the next thought. Oh, I'm just one more thought away. And if I could just tell, and if I can explain it to you, and you believe me with this, and then you follow it with that, and then by the time we're done, and then you got it, and then you got it, and then, you know, shut up and stuff it down, and whatever. He's like, then we're 24 thoughts away from where we need to be happy. And so, if you were able to restructure your personality in such a way that allowed you to experience more peace, more happiness, more joy, something you want to share with them, let them feel it, you know? You don't have to explain something like that to somebody. Nobody likes being preached to. You don't like being preached to by them. Be there with them. Show them a compassion they haven't seen. You have to be compassionate with that person, because we know what it's like to not want to look inward and to look into our thoughts all the time and get away from this. And that's a hurting place, you know? So that person, they need a compassionate person to make it easier for them, you know? Because you try to fight with them. Oh, you should think like this. Why do you think like that? I'm right, you're wrong, you know? And then it's over. It's like, okay, you shake hands. So I think that's how I think about it.
Question from the back.
Sorry, I didn't think you could see us back.
We can't. Who are you?
My question is regarding allergic reactions versus purging. Are they one and the same? I recently tried an Iboga microdosing and had quite a lymphatic axillary reaction, and I thought, oh, well, maybe that's telling me I should do it, or is that just considered part of a purge?
I mean, I'm a doctor, you know, it's a tough, you know, there is, I don't know exactly what you experienced, you know, I wasn't there to witness it, like we're getting to like medical questions, that's a tricky topic, so it's like, I don't know if you know, some people, let's say they have like is it possible to have an allergic reaction to one of these substances? Sure it is, you know, and somebody that has such a serious like anaphylactic reaction where they're going to swell shut and wheeze and be tight and have a rash, like pure allergy reaction. The allergic reaction in medicine is defined by like certain symptoms, and purging is not necessarily one of them. I don't know, most people don't swell. I don't know about Iboga from Ayahuasca, so it's like, maybe we should talk afterwards. I think it would be better because it's kind of a specifics type of question. And Tony gets a question.
Sorry.
You have to sing your question, Tony.
Met a young lady recently, her name was Charlie. She'll be happy to hear her share. In a nutshell, she came to ceremony with her knee injury that had been with her so long, she was given up her hope of being a yoga instructor.
Right.
Did one ceremony, of course, and I went, she healed. Right. And she later asked me what happened. You know, and of course, I don't know, you know. I go, you got healed, that's miraculous, you know. And how it happened, I don't know, and it probably doesn't matter. As long as you're saying, like, I didn't want to say anything because you don't want to jinx it, right? She's been having, and it was like months later, she's still writing us, telling us that she's now in yoga training. My question to you, relative to body, mind, and the PNEI network, in that context, what do you think happened?
Well, I mean, if at least that PNI network, we have examples of where you could have localized inflammation in the body, and so that was like, those are the examples in the book, how migraine headache could be an example of that. Somehow the nerves are generating an inflammation local to the area, so there is a physiology, like she has pain, she might have some swelling, you know, so that's going on, and that there could be, why is it localized to that area? Would, you know, we'd probably have to bring in some kind of energetic thought process, but you could say that the dynamic biochemistry around the energy thing is, yeah, it's some kind of inflammation being generated by her nerves and by her body and by other molecules being sent to that area. Why are they doing that? And the idea is that it's calling attention to the area. That's the typical reason for the body to do that.
For both, and I'm just speculating this, I wonder sometimes, do we just, like in her case, maybe we have some initial injury, right? And in the process of being nervous about that and nursing it, maybe maybe the pain becomes habitual, right?
Sure.
Like, I have a knee injury and I'm saying it over and over again, and maybe in this ceremony I'm willing to stop the story that I have.
That happens. There's trigger point injection treatments that are based on that. That you have these people with these trigger points in their back, you know, there's a certain, oh, this point is so tight in my back, and so what do? They numb it up to turn off the signaling, because there's this loop going on. So, you know, let's just turn it off, and so that you can feel what that's like, for it to stop, and see, is that something you could let go? So, I mean, that phenomenon happens, and that's one area where in Western medicine it's explored for that reason, some kind of neural loop, you know.
That's what I was looking for. I wondered if it was just some kind of loop.
Yeah.
Clearly, we've all seen miraculous kind of like healings. I've always wanted to get underneath and understand, like,
there could be neural loops of some kind, you know, that's a huge part of it, and a huge part of deconditioning the mind. And it's these new pathways, new ways of looking at it, that you could just break out of this tight loop. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
How important is for the shaman to, or not only the shaman, but if we go to a therapeutical context, for the facilitator to also consume the substance, whatever it is, you know. And I say this because in my personal ayahuasca ceremony, the shaman I was with told me how important it was for the shaman to also take ayahuasca so he could see what's going on with the other person's spirit. This I didn't dig until I had personal experience, but it was something different. It was with psilocybin, where, let's say, I experienced something you can call channeling with a friend of mine, and I was like, oh wow, okay, now I understand why he was saying that it's so important for the person that's facilitating the experience to take the substance as well, because you can see what's going on, right? So this is only like, you know, from a personal experience and from what he told me. What you guys have to say, is it required that the shaman takes ayahuasca every time he is doing a ceremony?
Say something. Well, I mean, that depends on the training of that shaman. There's many different schools. So you have like the MDMA assisted psychotherapy. They're not taking it with the client, you know. Have most of them taken it before they have. So, and the way that they work with people, they don't. Are there ayahuasca shamans that do it without drinking? Sure there is, you know. Are there energy healers and people that see, you know, without drinking or taking a substance? Sure there are. Are there times when you intuit something in somebody else just from your nature? And then in my like tradition that I learned in, yeah, we drink it, you know. And the people typically, we drink it with the patient. But again, like the higher masters of that, they don't drink too much. You know, they're very connected with very little. They're able to do what you're talking about. And so that's, for me, it's like, yeah, when you're learning, is it easier to be altered? It's different, of course. The training is about that. In certain ayahuasquero traditions, like the one I'm a part of, the training is using it, working with it as your ally in the ceremony, and you drink it. So we drink it every time. Do you have to, you know, no.
And I'd like to clarify, in a therapeutic setting, that at least in all the research that's being done, part of the training is often for the therapist to have their own psilocybin or psychedelic experience of whatever's being studied. But they are not under the influence during the subject's session themselves or the follow-up. There is something different that happens with ayahuasca, not with ingestion, but if, you know, I try and be open and say, and kind of squeak a little place that if the therapist has experience in altered states and is comfortable in spiritual, mystical states, then they can work with someone who's in and out of ayahuasca ceremonies. But the real honest truth is, if the therapist also has their own ayahuasca experience, then when they're in therapy, and both of them, neither the therapist nor the client are under the influence, there's a connection there that's quite magical, because they both are in relationship to this plant spirit. And that's, amazing things happen. I mean, and the way the therapists talk about it is they say things like, I just felt inspired to say something I would never usually say. Or, you know, there's some, and there's a sense of a third presence. So that's a little bit different. There was a Swiss psychiatrist who was doing groups using a variety of psychedelics, and her statement was, I take something too so that I'm in the same, I can understand the territory they're in. And I think I'm very much, and she actually got arrested and lost her medical license. But my position is, if the therapist needs to take something to access those realms, they don't know those realms well enough. So I really hope a therapist can have access to those realms without taking anything during a therapy session.
And then in the traditional context, like I can imagine a lot of shamans that I work with, they would say that. You know, they said, hey, that one, he doesn't drink it with it, you know, no es chama. Right? And that's, I can feel it. I can feel, I mean, I know how they talk. And I respect that, but that's a certain tradition, you know? That's a certain way. So it's not for me really in this broader world to come out and tell people that. You know, like, oh, that's not, you know, shamanism, because I might meet somebody that does things like that, and they might be very effective. So for me to go around and say that, that comes from a traditional perspective that I respect, but I think they're trying to make sure that you go with the real person that's really trained, you know. They say, oh, saben tomar, you know what I mean? They know how to drink. That's how you, and that's kind of like what she's talking about. It's another version of that, because it's a trickier, it's a mystical thing. You know, connecting to spirits and channeling energies is a whole other practice, you know, and then you train to know how to do it, and so you see, oh, they drink, oh, he knows.
Well, I'm not sure if you're familiar with you said you're Colombian American, right?
Yeah,
it's the Cofan culture in Colombia.
No, that's how, and it's not it's the Shipibos, it's the Cofanes, it's the Kamsa, it's the Ashaninka.
Yeah.
You know, so that's a very widely held, and it's the Brazilians. They drink with the shaman drink. Ayahuasquero means they drink ayahuasca. In Shipibo tradition, the patient may not drink, but the shaman drinks. And so that's the tradition. That's what it's about. But I'm just saying that, you know, here in America, and, you know, shamanism and stuff, there might be other ways that people might approach it. I'm just saying that. Maybe it's not the same, but I'm not here to judge, is what I'm trying to say.
Question?
Just one more question.
One more question.
I have a question right here. Hi.
Oh, you did. You won! Enter the prize, a chocoholic for table 5.
I'm just curious on hearing more about purge, like purge outside of vomiting, like laughter or crying, I've heard are also considered purges. as well as maybe a few other things that I don't know. Can you speak a little to that and the sort of like differentiating factors between vomit and the other?
Definitely.
This is, last time Rachel started talking about farting, which I thought was a little, come on, really? No, that's terrible. Strike me down. But well, I mean, I think I would just throw this out there, and then I think you can definitely help with this. Yeah, I do. But no, your body purges all different ways, right? It's not abnormal for somebody when they're anxious to get sweaty. Some people throw up when they're anxious, you know. Some people need to use the bathroom, you know, from an emotional overload of the situation. It's quite common, actually, that like the gastrointestinal response to emotional overload. It's a fun, you know, people throw up all the time. They're going to perform on stage. Oh, they puke, you know. It's too much. Or they sweat, or they break into tears, or they laugh, you know, or like in somatic experience therapy, you know, they shake. Their body shakes, involuntary movement, people shake, you know, and they're overwhelmed with emotion. And, well, you know, there's a lot of, those are the basics, I think, you know, some of them. And so that's just normal. For us, it doesn't matter, you know, how, why, what. The people are like, well, I'm not throwing up. It's like, well, it's not about throwing up. We don't just drink to throw up. It's not about throwing up. That's not what it is. That's not what it is, you know. Sometimes you throw up, you know. Sometimes you know why you're throwing up. Sometimes it's something in your guts and your intestines, and that's what has to move that way. Sometimes it's not, you know. And so it's a natural thing, and so we let it be natural. And I think that's, for me, that's the truth of it. Like when I'm working with the traditional people, they don't really sweat that kind of distinction, you know. Why this way? I always do this and I don't do that. And that person does this and I don't do that. And it's like, well, there's probably a lot of things about you that are different from other people, and the ceremonies are different, and maybe you did it 10 times, you know, and it happened this way every time, but then maybe try it 500 times. You know, you're going to learn a whole other thing about it. And so, like, whatever you think you know about it, it's like, well, maybe you don't have that much experience, you know, for somebody to say, this is not you, but I'm just saying in general, like, this is what always happens. If that happens to them, it's like, well, you might see it goes all different ways. And so that stuff is not so crucial. That's why I say that.
Yeah, I think that's lovely. And kind of, I think part of what Joe is saying is from our Western point of view, we try and understand and what's the meaning of this and how is this different from something else, and there's a process that happens, and how we relate to that healing process is important, and it's different and mysterious, and there are lots of different ways to discharge and cleanse and let go, and we don't always know exactly what one means or another means, and we don't have to put that on it. So, thank you.
I think that's
Thank you.
That's our time.
Thank you, Rachel and Joe, so very much.
Interesting experience playing that and wanting to feel it like, oh, microphones. How it works. So we're in the process of recording this the album, which I'm so excited about. This is actually not a plug for the album. It's months away. But in the process, we've been working with David and Shireen to develop these beautiful ceremony songs into songs that maintain the feeling of ceremony, but are very universally appealing in how they're being composed and produced. So I'm going to have Shireen share one of our fusions. process. We're going to do one more. We were calling the album Birds in Paradise. And I forget the official tagline, but it says it's inspired from our love and appreciation for traditional indigenous ceremony music. And we're working with 3 or 4 different producers. And the fun process has been like developing the songs in a ceremonial context and then taking them into the studio and flushing them out in a way that they actually feel like the way they do in ceremony. Through technology, we can do that. So it's been a really, really awesome process. Can't wait to share it. Uno más. So yeah, just a little taste of our version of ceremony music. Very different in this context, but you guys all get it, and it's an absolute pleasure. And Rachel, it's delightful to meet you. I'm so just fantastic, and Joe, always a pleasure. And Sita, forever my love. Thank you.